Hello friends, it's been a long time. I'm Elagatua and I'm finally back to cover the Smacky Cup 5 Round 2. We've got a lot to talk about in this video, and I apologize in advance. This video is going to be probably very heavy on the theory and the map breakdown, and the game recap might not go too long, so just be forewarned that that's the case, but we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into this one. And actually, I'm going to put this at the beginning of the video because I think this is a public service announcement. For the round 3 map of Smacky Cup 5, there is a cheesy HQ cap line for player 1 that's probably FTA, first turn advantage, but regardless of whether it's FTA or not, it's still going to be the round 3 map. So I want to put this out there so everybody knows, or at least more people know, that this cheese build exists, so that for all of you out there who roll player 2, you can at least know that this is something you have to be careful about. So here's what the build looks like. So you just do standard stuff here. And then on day 2, this first infantry here is going to come and ignore all the caps and just go straight to the black boat. And then from here, the black boat takes this infantry all the way up to here. And then normal cap stuff happens everywhere else. And then now, if player 2 makes the unfortunate decision to also move the black boat off of the HQ, then now player 1 can capture this city to see if the HQ still has the black boat on there. And if it's still on there, then actually player 1 can just finish this capture, or maybe even move it back to the port or something like that, which is kind of ridiculous. But if it's open, then the black boat can kind of see what's building and see if there's been any recons built. And so if it's a tank first build, well, I think you can see what is going to happen here. So yeah, that's a thing that was spotted out there. So thank you to let's see, who sent this to me. Anyway, I'll go by their name in this game. So I think Cosmos Nifter sent this to me. So I didn't come up with this myself. This is just something that somebody found, but I think that cheese wins like this are really lame, especially in tournaments. So for all you player 2s out there on this map in round 3, make sure that you have some way to not die to this. It'd be really silly to get knocked out of the tournament to a build like this. So that's your PSA. You have been warned. If you get your HQ cheesed, then don't say I didn't tell you well in advance. But that's all we're going to be talking about for Dynamite City V2 in this video, because this is the round 3 map and this is the round 2 video. So enough of that. Let's start talking about round 2. So the round 2 map for Smacky Cup 5 is called All Gillied Up V2. It's quite a name for a map, and just by looking at the map, it's well, there's a lot going on here. Looks a little bit intimidating from first glance, but I'm sure that's why you're here, to have me break this thing down. So let's go through everything step by step in our normal sequence here. So we've got our bases, got a weak side base here, and then we've got our strong side bases here with the neutral base over here. Likewise on the other side. And these bases are relatively impeded in terms of their vehicle movement. Now, the nice thing is that these bases don't have a lot of the really twisty paths that we've seen lately in a lot of matches, a lot of maps. And the bases do kind of have their direct vertical movement obstructed by the rivers and the mountains here. So you have to zig and zag a little bit to get your units out onto the map. But for your weak side base, you're able to kind of come this direction. Well, not that far. This direction, and then you can either split off here, or you can head into the center that way. And you're more or less only going to, well, if you're going to the center, you're only going to be obstructed by one forest. If you go further over to the right, then you're pretty much going through two forests no matter what, whether you go through these two or, you know, one of these paths. So it is a little bit slow to get out there, although obviously for infantry movement, that's not really going to be a problem. And then on the other side as well, this base that you start with here is generally you're going through these two forests here out towards the center of the map. You can also go this way, but then you're still going through two forests, unfortunately, so it's not really that much better. So generally you're going to send this base to the right, and then this base, I mean, your least obstructed path is going to the left here, which definitely is an option, but it is taking you away from the center of the map. So if you want to go to the center, the default path is going to be through the forest there. And a lot of this map is characterized by a lot of roads and shoals in the center of the map. So you can see like this whole area here, you've got a lot of free movement. So recons are going to be able to kind of go wild once you get to the center. But when we're looking at getting recons to the center from the bases, well, this terrain is pretty stifling. This terrain is marginally better. You get one square more. And then this, I mean, if you're going this way, that plains is going to eat a movement for your recon as well. So you're probably sending recons like this way from the weak side if you're choosing to build them from there. So despite the center of the map being very good for recons, getting them kind of out of the base area is still a little bit slow. So keep that in mind. All right, next up on our production buildings, we've got our ports here. So we got a port to the left and right center parts of the map. And these ports are pretty useful for the black boats and for refueling them. They are one infantry move away from the base, so you do tend to have this annoying little dance of when do you want to load stuff in the black boats versus when you going to allocate time to actually capturing the ports. And that's more relevant for this port than the other one, because on this port, you can actually load up the infantry here and not have to block the port. So you can kind of capture that one whenever you want. But on this side, your infantry loading is going to be on the same tile as the port. So if you're going to load an infantry, then you can't be capturing the port. So there's a little bit of finesse involved, figuring out the right time to do the capture on that side. But the ports are not going to be really used for producing units. This is not really a lander map at all, so you don't really need to think too much about that. And you don't need to really build black boats because you start with them. So it's pretty unusual to even have to worry about building any naval units. So ports are mostly just going to be there to refuel your black boats. And you do have one on each side, and you've got a port on each side as well. So as long as you choose not to extend your black boats too far into the map, you should have the option to be able to refuel them at your leisure. And we can talk about the airports. And airports are closely related to some of the other, I don't want to call them gimmicks necessarily, but some of the other quirks, mechanics of this map. We got this airport here that is pre-captured. So this is going to be providing you an extra 1K from the start. And that's also why we've got these labs here instead of HQs, is because the airport is pre-captured. So airport available from the start. However, it is, well, it's all gillied up behind these pipe seams. So even though you can build stuff, can't really do anything with it until you bust down one of these pipe seams. And there is actually a second airport over here on the side that is probably going to be your first accessible airport for much of the map. Now, I think we might pause here to talk about the pipe seams, because the airports and the pipe seams obviously very closely related. So you've got 3 pipe seams here, one on kind of every single side. Almost always you're going to be breaking the pipe seam on, if you're on the bottom, you're going to be breaking it on the left. If you're on the top, you're going to be breaking it on the right. That is primarily due to, well, first of all, you have this other airport over on this side already, so you don't really gain much by sending out air from this side. You really want the air to be coming this way to support this side of the map, because it's supporting your strong side. So just assume that you're going to be breaking this pipe seam when you choose to break down these pipe seams. And getting access to this airport is definitely something that you're going to want to do. It's always a tricky dance. Sometimes people see pipe seams and they think, I must blow up the pipe seam immediately before I do anything else on the map, and that leaves you vulnerable to aggression from your opponent. So you got to find the right time to break it, but you do want to be breaking this at some point relatively early, because this airport is going to be your primary airport for much of the match. Now, you might be asking, why wouldn't this airport be a primary airport? After all, it's pretty far forward, right? Like it's further forward than this one, and it's giving me power over kind of this part of the map. But the reason why this airport ends up not being very relevant usually is because of these missiles. And you start with predeployed missiles. We'll talk a little bit more later on about how to use them and what they should be doing. But importantly, you can see that both of our players here have kind of sent them over to this forest, and this is a nice resting place for the missiles to end up after the early game is concluded, and that is actually going to be locking this airport. So you can get this airport, but very often the case will be that you get missile locked by your opponent and you end up not being able to use it. So just keep that in mind, and if you're going to be building air units, you're going to want to break down that pipe seam. Okay, let's talk about comm towers next. So we have comm towers in the center, and we have comm towers in the corner. So this means that once everything has been captured, this is a 2 comm tower map for each side. That being said, these center towers are definitely much more accessible, and you really do have to kind of commit if you're going to end up with those corner towers. There's really 2 different ways that you can get to this tower in the corner. One way is you can bring this black boat all the way around here and then ferry an infantry down. The problem with doing that is that there's a good chance, unless your black boat starts out at full fuel before making the journey, there's a good chance that it's going to be a one-way trip, because it just takes a lot of fuel to get all the way around here. And then as soon as you're done, you have to go kind of all the way back. So generally you wouldn't want to use a black boat to get that comm tower until you've manage to use the black boat to get infantry to kind of all the cities in this area and get those secured, and then you don't really need the black boat as much for infantry transport, and then you're more free to get into the comm tower. Another option is if you know that the missiles are not going to be blocking this airport, you could also try to get a T-copter from the airport. I'm not a huge lover of that because the black boat is probably more cost effective and you're not sacrificing 5K for a third transport unit because you're starting out with these 2 black boats already. So I'm not crazy about it, but it is an option, especially if you are like a Von Bolt and you've got a decent income advantage and you're just trying to look to get it really quickly. That is a way that you can get it really quickly and at the price of 5K basically. So that's the comm tower in the corner. These comm towers in the center, they are, I mean, you can imagine, they are extraordinarily contested, extraordinarily valuable, and there's going to be a lot of fighting. There's defensive vision for this one with the mountain. And this mountain tile here, it's very easy to drop infantry off with the black boat. I really love how the players in this replay are just like exactly doing the thing that I'm describing when I get to this turn. It wasn't planned at all, it just kind of worked out that way. But anyway, so you can drop infantry with the black boat onto this mountain, and then you can kind of see what kind of captures are happening. And then for this comm tower, this is kind of the strong side. So generally, you're going to be pushing into this one. So it's kind of hard to sneak a comm tower. That's the point I'm getting at, because you're generally going to have vision of both comm towers most of the time. And it's very hard to actually complete a comm tower capture before your opponent gets vision to see what you're up to. And then if they see what you're up to, they're probably going to find a way to delay you. So comm towers, very important on this map. And especially if you are able to somehow control both comm towers in the center, that is pretty close to a win condition, if we're being honest. All right, let's talk about this recon. As if we didn't have enough mechanics to talk about on this map, we've got like 2 airports, comm tower in the corner, pre-deployed black boats, pipe seams. Oh, and we've got a spy mechanic as well. So this recon is going to be able to see some of the reinforcement paths, especially early on. So actually, I'm going to kind of flip back in this replay. So the best thing that this recon is able to do is see kind of the black boat movement and the order in which the captures happen. I'm going to pause this. So let's just take a look at the vision that the recon provides. So these forests obviously are going to be outside the vision. If you want to skip this forest from this base, you can actually go through the clear vision here. So I do like this mechanic in general. This is something that we saw something very similar to this in After Hour Animals in Smacky Cup 4 round 3, I believe was the map in the round for that. So very similar concept where you can kind of expose your vehicles and get 1 square of extra movement, or you can sacrifice 1 square of movement to keep it secret through the forest. The recon is also going to give some vision over here, but if you'll notice, this base does have a clear reinforcement path that does totally avoid vision from the spy. So as long as you're not sloppy and you don't accidentally like move units on your phone like into vision like this, you shouldn't be giving anything away vision wise on the weak side for vehicles. That being said, the spy is going to see when you try to like capture this port. I mean, we talked earlier about how this port is kind of wonky to capture, and you'll get some information about when your opponent is capturing this city as well to kind of chain it in here. But overall, I find that people really hate when their opponents have any vision on their side of the map. But this recon, I guess it's also providing vision at the airport, which matters later on. But regardless, I don't feel like this recon, this spy, actually provides a huge amount of information, which is good, by the way. Like, I don't think spy mechanics is very easy to make them too strong where they give you way too much info. But in this map, I think people maybe are overestimating how much information this spy is giving. And because they're overestimating the amount of information, they want to kill it really quickly. And I'm telling you, I don't think it's very important, actually, to prioritize this recon early on. I think it's much more important to break the pipe seam, more so than getting rid of the recon. Because the most that the recon is going to see ever is vehicles from this base. And you can still avoid that if you just want to pay the one square, the one tile tax. So it's really not that big a deal. Additionally, if you're building recons from this base, then the movement is actually the same. That's actually not true. It's almost the same. It's like a one square penalty. Anyway. Spreading misinformation, sleeping soundly. Just plant that GIF on there. I'll ask my editor to do that. Unfortunately, my editor is me, and I'm too lazy. All right. Yeah. So I don't think this recon's very good. Very good. I don't think this recon is very important to kill. That's the bottom line. It's fine to kill later on if you have an artillery, especially if you're Von Bolt and you can get like 2 comm towers. I believe if you're Von Bolt and you get 2 comm towers, then you start one-shotting this recon with artillery. Like, then it's like, great, find a turn to leave an artillery over here and just kind of get rid of it. But I just don't think you should be killing it in the first like 10 turns. And you should definitely not be killing it before you get rid of this pipe seam. So prioritize accordingly. I've seen a lot of people make this mistake and they end up spending like 2 shots of artillery on the recon, and then they move up and they spend 2 shots on the pipe seam. And then, especially if you're doing this like really, really early on, you're basically playing a tank down for the entire capture phase. It's not good. It's a really easy way to get behind. So anyway, I will cease to beat that dead horse. Now, missiles. Okay. There's a lot of things that you can do with these missiles. I think they're not... I don't think there's a need to get super crazy with the missiles. The purpose of these missiles primarily is to either end up in this corner or like end up here to aid in aggression on the weak side. So if you're thinking about like a long-term destination for these missiles, like you kind of, in the early game, you kind of want to keep them in the middle. You want to make sure that your opponent isn't doing anything silly, trying to get any comm towers. Maybe you can think about blocking a property. And the movement for missiles is pretty good in the center area because these are all shoals and bridges and one movement terrain. So the missiles can kind of get around for a while. But eventually you're going to want them to kind of drift over here. So yeah, I think like at most, like you can maybe try to block these cities, or especially if you see that your opponent might be going for an early comm tower capture, you can just kind of plant the missiles on the comm tower and force them to get delayed. And that also potentially can open any capturing infantry or any attacking infantry open to counterattacks on the low defense terrain around the comm towers or the contested cities. One final thing, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again. So there's no HQ on this map. You just got these labs here. These labs are pretty far back. Not really realistic for a game to end in a lab capture, but just be aware that that's what that is, and don't let your opponent get it, which would be pretty hard to let that happen, but don't do it, because your game will be over if you let that happen. Okay. I believe we have managed to cover all of the core aspects of this map. Now let's talk about strategies and how this map is going to play out. And there's a lot to talk about here too. This map is quite complex in many regards, and I like maps like this. I actually really like this map. I kind of, well, I'll save that for the game recap. Not going to get ahead of myself. So let's start talking about contested cities and contested properties. This is a vertical map. So your center line is like right here, right? It's a very straight line down the center. Not exactly, but even though the map is divided into a top half and a bottom half, that doesn't necessarily mean that the zone of controls are going to exactly fall across this line. And actually, the map itself is kind of helpfully given us this shoal path through the center of the map. And this is actually a pretty good approximation of the zones of control for either player. It's not 100% accurate, but if you ever want a really simple visual way of knowing whether you might be overextending, when you're crossing the shoals, you're kind of crossing into the enemy territory, and you're going to end up closer to their side of the map to their reinforcements than you are from yours. So that's a very good visual indicator. But in terms of properties, generally speaking, the way it breaks down, it's not a simple breakdown, okay? And this is going to tie into what we're going to talk about in a little bit as well. But there's another one of those maps where there's no equilibrium because early on the weak side has a lot of access to like this area here, and maybe even this area early on. And so you're going to be able to potentially like get these properties from this base. However, as the game goes on, the strong side is very, very strong on this map. And so you may start out getting these properties, but they may be difficult to hang on to. So they kind of start off being yours, but then as the game goes on, they become more and more contested. So like in capture phase, they're safe. Later, they're not. So primary contested properties are going to be these two, the comm towers, and then like maybe these center two, kind of depends, and then these over here. So there's a pretty decent amount of contestable properties on this map, but this map is first and foremost defined by the interactions between the strong side and the weak side. And that's what makes this map very interesting. So let's talk about that some, because I think this is a really core thing to grasp in order to play this map correctly. And this is a little bit of an advanced concept maybe for some of the less experienced players out there. So bear with me as we kind of talk about this. But the strong side, we have 2 bases here, and then generally speaking, you're gonna be breaking this pipe seam. Well, you should be breaking this pipe seam. Not even generally speaking, you should be breaking this pipe seam. So the air comes this way, base comes this way, base comes this way. So you've got the ability to reinforce a lot of your income right in this direction. And the only thing that is coming at you from the other side is this lone base. So in practice, what this means is that the strong side is much stronger than the weak side, especially if you put the missiles in the forest, because then that negates this airport. In a lot of maps, what you will see is you will see the weak side base have an airport that supports it. And when that's the case, it helps strengthen the power of the weak side, because if the weak side ever gets in trouble, you can start spamming air units from that airport, and from there you can kind of stabilize things a little bit, or at least utilize more of your income on the weak side to counteract the pressure that is coming from the greater number of bases that your opponent has in that direction. But on this map, that is less of an option, because that airport can get locked. So what this means is that you have the ability to potentially really overwhelm the weak side of your opponent. And so any sort of trading for infantry on the weak side can be very good for you, because if you're fighting in this direction with a lot of strength, then your opponent is going to be needing to build vehicles out of this base. If they're building vehicles out of this base, well, how are they going to ever replace their infantry on this side? Infantry would have to come from all the way over here. It's a really long way. So what this means ultimately is these properties, even though your top player can get there very quickly in the early game and maybe lock some of them down, as soon as the fighting breaks out, if the weak side player kind of trades away a lot of their units, then almost all of this could potentially be in danger. Maybe not this city, right? But you can kind of push very deep into this area here just by kind of wiping out all the infantry. So that is kind of the plan A on this map, is push really hard to the weak side and clear out all the infantry. And once you clear all of the infantry, it becomes very, very difficult for your opponent to hold on to these properties here, and you can get a lot of control here. Additionally, the center of the map is really, really characterized by low defense terrain. Kind of the river shoal. This is not a completely symmetric drawing, but anyway, you look through the center area, and what you see a lot of cities, a few silos, and then almost everything is roads and shoals. The way that this affects the game is position control really becomes important, because you either have the high defense terrain that you're sitting on and you're able to control, or you have to be the one to put units on very low defense terrain to be attacking into your opponent's units that are on the high defense terrain, which makes you very vulnerable to counterattacks and bad trades. So this terrain really favors meticulous planning and good positioning, things like that, so that you want to be the one that's got units on the cities and units on the silos, so that if your opponent's going to get rid of those units, then they've got to be in the vulnerable positions, and then if they fight you, you can take back those high defense tiles and then also counterattack the very exposed units and then win fights. That's the gist. And so I think with that, we can now talk about the COs. We could probably talk more about the strong side, weak side dynamics and things like that. Like, I don't even feel like I went that deep into it compared to some of the maps that I've done in the past, but we're already 35 minutes in. So let's get into the COs. So this is a new tier 2 matchup, which means that we've got Von Bolt, Olaf, and Eagle. And then also for funsies, we have enabled Grit as well. Grit sometimes is treated as a tier 1 CO, but if you know anything about Grit's tiering is often very strange, and the reality is Grit is put into tier 1 primarily because if Grit is playable, then Grit is banned. That's often the case. And so or if Grit is viable, then Grit is essentially banned. And in Fog, if Grit is allowed, usually he's really crap, really trash. So we'll get more into that later, because getting ahead of myself a little bit, I was playing against a Grit player in this match. So we'll have plenty to say about Grit and breaking him down later on. But to skip ahead a little bit, I would not be picking Grit if I were you on this map. I don't think it's a good Grit map. I think the two best COs on this map are Von Bolt and Eagle, for sure. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not confident in which one is necessarily better. I kind of feel like you can never go wrong picking Von Bolt, but this is not a map where I feel like picking Eagle is a mistake necessarily. There's a lot of reasons why Eagle is better than he would be otherwise. First of all, you're starting off with a pre-deployed missiles, so that synergizes with Lightning Strike quite well. Still, your opponent can play around it, but certainly it's a lot easier to line up a missile shot on an air unit if you get to move it 4 squares before you have to have the air unit in range. So that's quite nice off the get-go. Additionally, multiple airports, generally good for Eagle. This airport is very strong. The reinforcement to the middle is very, very quick. So Eagle likes that as well. The danger for Eagle is the comm towers. But with Eagle, you're looking to get a comm tower, try and stall the map at like as close to even income as you can, and then you get Lightning Strike and everything dies. Because you have a lot of tanks and you have a lot of copters, and there's not a lot of room to hide on this map, and you can just kind of destroy everything. But you gotta be alive until the Lightning Strike and not be crippled. And That's not always easy against a good attack from your opponent. If you are Von Bolt on this map, well, Von Bolt generally, as long as it's not a mirror, Von Bolt is going to be owning the contested properties. That's Von Bolt's job. And on this map, that especially means the comm tower. So if you're Von Bolt and you're playing against an Eagle or an Olaf, your number one job is to make sure that your opponent is on 0 towers until they get to this corner. And your secondary objective is to get both of the towers, because a 3 comm tower Von Bolt does some really crazy things. So that is going to be your objective as Von Bolt. And Von Bolt wants to play very aggressive, especially on the weak side, and also very positional. These high defense tiles, it's going to be very, very difficult for a 0 comm tower CO to dislodge anything from these tiles. So these tiles, you need to make them yours. You put infantry on them, and then you need to brawl effectively so that you can create an advantage that will help you survive the inevitable superpowers of your opponents that are very strong. But Von Bolt definitely cannot be playing passive, cannot split the map. Use your infantry, get good positioning, sit on high defense tiles, and win the infantry wars before the superpower comes online. Now, we didn't talk about Olaf. I don't think Olaf is quite as good as he would normally be. Certainly, Winter Fury is still going to be strong no matter what, and definitely relatively easy to play. The one downside with Olaf is the center area, because there's so many shoals and so many roads, the Winter Fury is not quite going to be slowing down your opponent's movement as much as it would on other maps. So I do like Eagle a little bit more than Olaf on this map, but I do think, honestly, all 3 of the COs are very playable, and I'm not even confident necessarily saying that Eagle's better than Von Bolt or Von Bolt's better than Eagle. I think it's in the gray area, and I'd have to see more matches or maybe play a longer match in one of those matchups to get a better feel for who I think is the better pick. So pick whatever you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable with aggression, probably want to play Von Bolt. If you want to try and play Stolly defensively, Eagle, probably your pick, but I wouldn't stress over it too much. This is a map with freedom, right? We like that. Okay. We made it through the COs. Now, I think we need to talk about grit. So, skipping to the future, the matchup that we are playing is Von Bolt against Grit. And we are Von Bolt, which is happy. And I can understand the appeal of Grit on this map, in theory. I get it. But there's some things you need to know about Grit and why I think he works really, really badly on this map. And so, first of all, let's talk about the potential matchups for Grit. So if you're Grit and you're playing against Von Bolt, you are gonna be entering the recon hurricane, the recon tornado, the recon natural disaster. If you're playing against Eagle in your Grit, then you've charge builds up and then Eagle gets lightning strike and you die. Like the problem with Grit against Eagle is you have no win condition. Because you can't kill Eagle, and if you can't kill Eagle, Eagle stalls better than you. So it doesn't matter. So like I just feel like the Grit against Eagle matchup is completely unwinnable for Eagle. And the second Eagle gets Lightning Strike, Grit just instantly dies. So and Olaf is not much better because the global damage is just going to slowly eat you away. Because Grit, you kind of want to build up a death ball, but if you're building up a death ball, then you're building up a lot of units that will all get Winter Fury basically. So if you're, Olaf is weak against COs that kind of want to brawl and keep the unit count down, keep the overall army value down, and Grit is not really hoping for that. So all three matchups basically very tough for Grit, in my opinion. In this new tier 2 tier. Let's look at kind of why Grit is hard to play. So I think the appeal of Grit on this map is the thinking that we've got all these properties that are like kind of in the center. And if I just establish this wall of artillery, like, back here, pretty close to my bases, like maybe 2 artillery moves away from the base, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So like, starting these forests, then maybe like this forest and this forest and this forest. You kind of play around those 4 forests. And you put artillery in all of them, and you're kind of covering all of the contested properties as a Grit, right? For the most part. And if you cover all the contested properties, then you can kind of stall out the game and make it really hard for your opponent to attack into you. And I think that's the theory. Let's look at this game that shows, I think, a relatively ordinary Grit versus Eagle matchup, right? The matchup is not very ordinary in general, but I think this is a good example of what happens. So Grit is going to be building a lot of artillery, which is pretty normal. The problem with artillery is that artillery have to be in the place that is getting attacked before the attack happens in order for them to actually do anything. So in terms of just cover, like area that they cover, artillery are always going to be slower to the fight than any other units, because all the other units, they can move and then also attack in the same turn. So, for example, this guy was built the previous turn, and so now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now he can cover all this area next turn. But if it was a tank instead, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then it can attack anything in. Excuse me. Oh, I had to sneeze. Anyway, so you're attacking here, but if you have a tank, you can basically extend further with the same number of moves. So when you're building artillery, you're basically slower to have attacking power in the center of the map compared with other COs that are building recons and tanks, purely because artillery have to be in position before they can shoot. So what this means is that your early game is going to be slower to all the contested areas, which means you're vulnerable. So against Eagle, that doesn't matter as much because Eagle doesn't really care as long as the game goes late. But against Von Bolt, this is a very big weakness because Grit really needs to build up like defensive or power in a certain area in order to be able to control it and win it safely. But Von Bolt is already an aggressive CO. So if you're weaker in the early game against a CO that already wants to be aggressive, then your early game is going to be even more limited than another CO would be against Von Bolt. So as Grit, you're definitely very vulnerable to aggression, and you're especially vulnerable to recon aggression. And that is the real challenge with Grit. You got the ability to spam out these 6K artillery units, and they're cheaper than tanks. They're pretty good, but when you're playing against a Von Bolt or an Eagle, or especially like a Max or a Von Bolt, like I think Max and Von Bolt, they're playing against a Grit very similarly. Recons are 4K, and recons can move really fast. And if you look at the center of this map, like recons can kind of zip all over the place very, very quickly. And as we mentioned, Grit's got to be where Grit wants to fight before the fight happens. Otherwise, if Grit is just running around trying to chase down recons left and right with a bunch of artillery, it's never gonna work. They're never gonna catch the artillery. Never gonna catch the recons. So I think this map terrain is very challenging for Grit to establish control, and in many ways, just like you can exploit the immobility of a mech ball from Sammy by choosing to go elsewhere, you can also exploit the lack of mobility of an artillery army by just deathballing somewhere else on the map. And generally speaking, you're just going to be able to run over any other part of the map where Grit is not choosing to accumulate the artillery. Because if Grit spreads out all the artillery, any death ball that is sufficiently concentrated from an opponent is just going to be able to crush either side. So it kind of doesn't matter where the opponent of Grit attacks, as long as the opponent of Grit attacks with all their stuff. Generally it's going to work out pretty badly for Grit, because Grit has to absorb the attack first before the artillery can actually fire, because that's just how Grit works. So if Grit splits his army, it's bad for Grit. But if Grit concentrates his army, does everything to one side, then that's where Grit is just vulnerable to a maneuverable and mobile enemy. Because if you know that all this stuff is here, well, you just crush the weak side really hard. Or if all the stuff is coming to the weak side, then you eat the comm towers on the other side, and you get up to 3 towers. Because Grit can't really defend this and this at the same time and still remain clumped up in a death ball. So it's just very hard for Grit to make it work against any of these other new tier 2 COs, especially on this map. One thing that you do sometimes see as Grit is, instead of opening with just pure artillery, you see some early tanks from Grit, even though they're a little bit lower firepower than other CO's tanks. The tanks are there to counter the recon spam. But especially if you're playing as Von Bolt, you get the recons on these high defense tiles. A Grit tank with 0 comm towers attacking a Von Bolt recon on a city does 4 HP of damage. 4. Less than half of the recon's life. So how is Grit ever going to kill any recons? Especially in the early game. If you get enough recons out, Grit just can't. There's no way that Grit can overcome the swarm from Von Bolt, or at least it's very hard for me to imagine. that could ever occur. So anyway, we're in this Eagle game, and we're just going to kind of zoom through this. But the way this is going to work, or this map is going to work for Eagle, is very different than a game would work against Von Bolt, because Eagle's more okay just handshaking the middle, because the timer is Lightning Strike, and Eagle doesn't really need to win before Lightning Strike happens. And so you can see here, I mean, there's 1 million artillery, but look what happened on the weak side here. If you notice, there's no infantry. No infantry left. So sure, all these artillery, like, is very hard for Eagle to steal these properties, but you can't deny the comm tower because you've got no infantry left. And that's kind of the strong side, weak side thing that we talked about earlier, where if you trade out all your infantry on the weak side, then you kind of got nothing left. And this is exactly what happens. And Grit has a bunch of artillery on the other side as well, but Eagle is mobile and is just ignoring them. There's only infantry on the other side. So there's like 4 artillery. I mean, obviously this one was just built, but Eagle is just consolidating the death ball here and is able to fight decently against Grit, even though Grit is very far back. And really the important thing is Eagle's able to get this objective because all the infantry are dead. So Grit uses a power to kind of clear some stuff off, and that does pretty well. And even, like, you know, Grit's up in army supply, like, pretty well here, like up about 32k in army supply. But now Eagle's at full charge, and what's Grit gonna do? Like, how is Grit gonna extend anywhere and obtain any objective, given that Lightning Strike is online? Like, this Eagle can sit here as long as Eagle wants. And by the way, Eagle's up on income as well. So, like, Eagle can just build air units until day 35 if Eagle wants. Like, so yeah, Grit is like, okay, I'm just gonna camp here, but it doesn't matter. You can see, like, it doesn't even make it to the Lightning Strike because it's a strategic dead end. There's no way out for Grit here. Grit can be up, you know, 30k in army supply, but Grit's never going to be able to obtain any of these contested properties. It's just the match can only go one way. So that's a little bit of why I think that Grit is very difficult to play on this map. There's some other reasons as well. That Grit is just tough in fog in general, because fog maps tend to be very open, because they need to favor front shifting and things like that to enable some of the tactics that make fog interesting. And Grit tends to struggle on maps like that. Grit likes really choky maps and maps where you can set up very strong walls, things like that. And in fog, it's just very difficult to wall because you don't have a clear idea of how much stuff might be coming to break your wall. So we're almost at the hour mark. I say this kind of joking but not joking. This is probably going to be one of the shorter videos. Let's go look at the game from my round 2. All right, let's see how much I remember about this game. So the objective here as Von Bolt is we're going to build a bunch of recons. And then we are going to send them all to the weak side. And we're going to kill as much infantry as we can. We're going to make sure that Grit does not get cute and try to steal any comm towers. We're going to try and make sure that Grit doesn't get any of these contested properties as well, to the extent that we can. And we're just going to go for kind of an econ, relatively econ opening. We're not doing like day 3 recon or anything like that. There's a lot of properties on this map, so you really do need the early infantry to kind of get everything. But we're just going to try and get up to a place where we have a lot of recons as quickly as possible. So I've set this up so that this infantry can get to here quickly to do a capture chain. But we're going to be eating this port quickly. And then move the black boat. And this guy, I think this guy is going to here. And then this infantry. So now it's set up so that both of these guys are going to load into the black boat. So I get to boost 2 guys while being efficient. This property is kind of annoying. It's like away in the corner. I end up prioritizing this really, really low because what I really want to do is I want to get my infantry kind of up in this area relatively quickly. Not necessarily to be aggressive, but just to be capturing stuff there with the hopes of transitioning that into aggression once my recons are online later on. But if I want that to happen, I kind of need to get this stuff captured relatively quickly. And if I want to get it captured relatively quickly, then I need to get the infantry up in that vicinity as early as possible. So now I move this infantry up, and this gives him access to this property, which would otherwise be 3 infantry moves from this base. But with the black boat, it becomes 2 infantry moves. So it's a little bit more efficient to use the black boat to get there. And then if I recall correctly, this guy will end up on the port. So seeing this is like a little bit of inefficient movement. You really would prefer to have the black boat on the port so that you can boost the infantry here and make this a 2 infantry move city rather than a 3. So this is, when you see inefficiencies like this, it's I guess it's encouraging for my confidence. But yeah, it's a tough situation for Grit for sure. Now we have very good vision of this whole area, and now we're going to be able to start getting into this section of the map with a lot of important contested properties, trying to lock those down as quickly as possible. Now is our first recon. It's day 4. This is a relatively sane timing. We're going to go day 4, day 5 recon, and then I think a double recon the turn after that. So we're going to end up with 4. And against other COs, this might be a meme build, but against Grit, this is pretty much the standard. You can get more recons than Grit can get artillery. So Von Bolt is just going to monopolize all of the contested territories in the center. We've got the missiles. Seeing the comm tower here, just to have eyes on it, make sure that nothing silly happens. The win condition for me in my mind is we get both of these comm towers early, and then we get this comm tower later, and then we're 3 tower Von Bolt, and we're just having a lovely time as recons. Like plus 40%, is that, do recons one-shot infantry at that point? I think it's close. Anyway, Von Bolt does some ridiculous stuff once he gets a lot of comm towers, so that's the objective there. More capturing. We are going to be avoiding the spy here. Oh, I didn't spread misinformation with this recon, because yeah, the recon can get there. So if he goes through here, he gets blocked by this grass. So yeah, so this spy would only see a tank moving this way. It doesn't, recons don't even matter at all. Anyway. I'm recording this video a while after the match happened, because unfortunately I was sick like the previous week, so I didn't have a voice to record this video, and I've forgotten some of the details. There's my other recon, and we're now just going to be sending recons to this area, trying to exploit our strong side and take advantage of his weak side. So we see artillery show up here. This is fine. It tells us that we basically have the green light to attack anything we want with our recons once they arrive, because it looks like this is going to be a pipe seam breaker, or he's going to try and clear off the spy, which is absolutely fine by me. Now that we have this infantry on the mountain, we can be very confident that we will not have any sneak attempts at capturing the comm tower, and that's really what we're just there to prevent. Grit on 0 towers, obviously, gonna have a very, very difficult time removing recons. And put this guy here to decide. Going for the city is probably too much. I think the plan is to send him here, but I'm also thinking about, maybe I just go straight for the comm tower and lock it down. But I think I end up going for the more economical approach in the end. So yeah, this is the 4th recon here. So now we've got our roving recon hit squad, and so they're just going to make this area belong to me. That is their job. So going after the spy, not a big problem. And we see this black boat like dropping off an infantry here. This is completely bonkers, to be perfectly honest. It's a really aggressive infantry directly into the recons that are fully prepared to harass it. So we just reveal it, take our free 6 damage on it, and then seeing that, we're just going to go for this comm tower with this guy, because this guy can go over here. Just make sure we get our comm towers locked down, because that's basically our victory condition, right? Like, our victory condition is getting both of these comm towers, so given our opponent's slow opening, might as well just go for it, right? It doesn't really cost anything. We're going to start to send this guy around in preparation for going for the comm tower, because this guy captures this guy captures this, and then this guy captures this and then goes over. So we kind of have everything set up, and now we can get artillery. So this artillery is actually going to go up this way, and we want to break the pipe seam there. And then we've got a tank coming from this side, just in case our opponent builds any tanks over here. We'll have some counter firepower to that. Goodbye, recon. So that infantry, I guess, retreats, sits on the mountain now, but that's no problem. Recon getting an attack in 1 turn earlier than we were expecting. And now we've got a comm tower. lockdown. This recon kind of sees what's going on here. So now our new objective is we just want to kind of kill all these infantry. Once the infantry are gone, then our infantry push will just be able to kind of take over this area. We do need to be a little bit careful. We kind of want to see if anything goes into this forest. We'd like to know if there was a artillery. We see this recon. So seeing this recon is interesting. Because I think this recon existing means that there can't be a tank anywhere. Which means we have the green light to actually go in and attack with these recons. Normally, recon on recon violence is not good. This is in most matchups because if you have a recon and you attack a recon, sure, you're damaging their recon, but the counterattack damage from their recon basically puts your recon in one-hit KO range from a tank. So even if you do like extra 2 HP of damage to their recon, now both of your recons can get one-shot by a tank. So it kind of doesn't advantage you at all necessarily. However, in this situation, recon and recon violence is no problem because we're Von Bolt and we're attacking from a missile silo. So we are not in one-hit KO range from any tanks. And we're also pretty sure that there's no tanks anyway. So this is just kind of free damage. Also is nice because we can see this forest. So if anything shows up in there, we should be able to know about it. And now we're getting, we're at almost 2 towers unless Grit wants to send in infantry just to delay this another turn. But you can see why it's very difficult for Grit to contest these center areas because the stuff to contest this would need to already be here in order to delay this. And you'd already be under a lot of pressure from the recons here, right up in your face. It's very hard to stabilize. That's a second recon coming in here, I believe. So there's a lot of recons for Grit, which means not a lot of tanks. So I'm not sure what is going on there, but I don't mind. One nice thing about having a ton of recons is that you tend not to make a lot of mistakes because you see what your opponent's doing. So recon spam, not merely good because it counters Grit, but it helps you make better decisions as well. So we finish up all our captures here. Now we're on 2 towers as Von Bolt. Artillery is in position to break the pipe seam. We are just ignoring the spy. If we want to later on, we can one-shot the spy now, I believe, with 2 towers. Or maybe 3 towers, I'm not sure. But anyway, we're just going in, right? Like, this is our 4 recon turn, so we no longer care. We are here to kill stuff. And we kill 2 infantry here, and then we put the recon on the city, which means that even if this tank attacks into the recon, it's going to do 4 HP of damage. And then this tank, we move it forward. I could have put it here, I guess, but it doesn't really matter because either way, it's in vision of either the black boat or the infantry that we saw move into this forest. But this tank actually covers this recon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if this tank goes around here, well, then my tank can counterattack the other tank. So not a lot of good options for Grit. And this also has the benefit of blocking this black boat, because I think this black boat wants to get an infantry to the comm tower over there, but now the tank is blocking the shoals, so the black boat can't even move there. So at this point, we're setting up for 3 tower von Bolt. We've basically got all of our contested properties. This can never get captured. These are going to have a really hard time getting captured. This is now deniable by infantry. This is why we wanted to get the infantry out pretty early. It's because now von Bolt with like all the towers, like I can just kill infantry with my infantry without having to commit any vehicles there. Yep, that's the game. So we can take a look at this with full vision. There's not a whole lot to recap here. As you can see, there's nothing to contest these. All this stuff can't really proceed any further. So in the coming turns, I'm going to end up getting these 2 cities already up 4K. Going to be on 3 towers. I mean, it's what it was. This is a game that we played. So that, I think, concludes the replay analysis. I don't really have that much more to say about this. I hope you can look at this replay and see why it would be hard for Grit to win on this map against a lot of recons, and why Grit would be have an uphill fight against any of the other new Tier 2 COs. I feel like I don't have quite as sharp of an understanding of this map as I normally would, because the strategy that I played in this map was very specific to playing against Grit, and the game didn't get very far. So I didn't really learn too much in the game itself just from the way things played out. But sometimes you got games like that. So that's been round 2. I think we're just going to wrap this video here. Short and relatively sweet for my standards. Let's see what other stuff is going on. We're still waiting for the Smacky Cup 3 finals to kick off. We got to wait for Degis and Jack Lee Man to finish their match. But no matter who I end up playing, that's going to be a really good opponent to be playing against. So I'm looking forward to that match. I've got the Smacky Cup 4. The semifinal match for that tournament is ongoing as of recording time. So we'll see how that goes. It's been an interesting match so far. Video should be good for that once it finally concludes. We'll see how it turns out. Yeah, and then Smacky Cup 5 going to be ongoing, although it looks like some matches are still underway to figure out who's going to advance to round 3 to face me. So we got a little bit of time there, probably. I'm guessing maybe 2 to 3 weeks before that has any chance of kicking off. So anyway, thanks for watching these. If you're still here, appreciate you. I am going to call it there because my voice is flagging already. I guess I'm not 100% after my cold. But yeah, stay tuned. Working on some fun stuff. So see you next time.